All right. I'll take the next opportunity to introduce Mr. Biraj Patnaik. I think Sucharita Madam has already introduced him, but a quick introduction on him is Mr. Patnaik is the Executive Director of National Foundation of India, which is an independent grant-making organization committed to deepening democracy and securing social justice to the grassroots. Sri Patnaik has provided his advice to the top echelons of the Supreme Court of India, acting as the Principal Commissioner of the Indian Supreme Court in the right to food case for close to a decade. He is considered as a pioneer in the Food Security Act, and he is acclaimed for his work both at the national and the international level, having worked with Amnesty International, State Health Resource Center, Center for Equity Studies, Program for Women's Economic and Social and Cultural Rights, and Mobile Pages. He is on the international editorial board of the Global Food and Nutrition Watch. I would like to hand over to Sri Patnaik. Sri Patnaik ji, you can start.
Yeah. So thank you, Soumyajit, and thank you, colleagues of the AIPC, for inviting me for this webinar, and thank you for the very generous introductions. Now, I'll leave Devinder Sharma ji to speak about the details of the Farm Bill and the implications of each of the sections of the bill, because he's best placed really to take us through it as somebody who has been deeply engaged with farmers' issues, not just from a right to food perspective, but also from the entire agricultural development perspective. But what I want to lay down here is very briefly some of the reasoning and the logic why we have the kind of architecture for food security in the country that we have today. And it's very important to understand that if you want to understand the damage that these bills are likely to cause, or the impact of these acts are likely to cause in the coming years. Now, as you know, from the 1980s onwards down to the 1990s, post-Green Revolution, with great difficulty, India had emerged out of a period of famine, out of a period of large-scale starvation, to ensure that we had become a net food secure country, in the sense that there were many other challenges to food security or the right to food, which was absorption, which was absence of micronutrients, which was non-availability of certain commodities. But by and large, for staple crops, we have been a net exporter for the past few decades. And it is the hard work of successive governments since the 1960s which has led to the situation where we became a net exporter. Not just that, we were able to create an architecture for ensuring that nobody went hungry in this country by ensuring a very critical link from the farmers directly to the producers, which was the public distribution system, where the government was the main intermediary. So government procured. So when you look at the minimum support price mechanism and you look at government procurement, it is not just something that helps farmers. It is primarily also meant to support consumers in poor urban areas or rural areas across the country. And that has been the basis of the architecture of the food security in India for many, many decades. This architecture was not perfect. It was flawed because while consumers got a good deal, a lot of farmers did not have the full benefit of the prices that should have been paid to them under the MSP. Because remember, MSP means it stands for minimum support price. There is a minimum. It's not a price that is way beyond what they have spent, but absolutely the very basic minimum that government feels beyond which the price should not crash. Unfortunately, because of demand supply economics, as you know, during the time of harvest, even this minimum support price becomes then the price at which effectively all procurement happens. You know, very few people buy above the minimum support price. It becomes the base price, the markup price at which the government and anybody else in the market procures it. That is the basis of public procurement in the country. And the MS Swaminathan committee recommendations had said that, very simply put, they had proposed a formula that whatever the Commission on Agricultural Costs and Prices estimates as to be the cost of production, you must add at least 50% and make that the MSP. So if a farmer, the cost of production is 100, then the MSP should be at least 150 rupees. Today, as Devinder Bhai has worked extensively on this, he can tell you in terms of farm incomes, you are getting, the farmer is not even able to recover or is barely able to recover his cost of production from the minimum support price that was provided. The entire mechanism of the public distribution system and subsequently the National Food Security Act, which I would come to that, it formed the basis of the architecture for food security in India. This was not just about supporting some farmers or supporting some consumers. It was the central pillars on which this entire architecture has been built, which is very different from the global architecture. And how is it different from the global architecture? Because India, despite all the difficulties that it faced in the initial years, refused to succumb to the pressures that were put on it to liberalize its farm gate to liberalize its agriculture policies and link them to global trade. We were relatively unaffected by what happened in other parts of the world in terms of whether it was market crashes, credit squeezes, droughts, famines, because we had a system of a minimum support price. You had a system where government centrally procured costs and had built over the years a very durable food grain reserve, where any excess surplus that was acquired from the farmers that was not needed for the public distribution system was put in terms of surplus. And of course, food rights activists like us have always argued that this surplus was at times excessive. It led to rotting of grains, but it served two very vital purposes. One, of course, to deal in case there was a famine, in case there was a war, you had a surplus with the government that it could use to tide over a short-term crisis. If one part of the country did not have food grains, they could immediately rush it to that part of the country. Second, it also served as a market control mechanism. So if in the short run, prices of any one commodity went up, government could use its stocks to ensure that they release these stocks in the market and thereby bringing the prices of that commodity down. So which meant that the central government holding of stocks, the holding of stocks by governments, fundamentally were a mechanism to control market prices, to control inflation, to ensure that consumers were not left at the mercy of traders. And it is in the context of this larger architecture that the institution of the APMC, the Mandi, the various elements, laws, legislations like the Essential Commodities Act, like the anti-hoarding legislations across the country, we have worked on them and built up what I would say not a perfect, but a fairly robust system. I wouldn't say it is perfect because many politicians in the past have gamed this system for personal benefit. You had corruption in the system. So by no means, no system is perfect. But this is the best that we had. This insulated us from global trading norms, like say the World Trade Organization, the WTO, where, as you know, enormous amount of subsidies constituting to hundreds of billions of dollars, if not trillions of dollars, are given by the West to ensure that their farm produce remains competitive. And unfortunately, under the Uruguay round negotiations in 1992, we do not have the luxury that Western countries had. We signed on to an imperfect deal. The developing world at that point did not realize that they were signing on to an imperfect deal. And therefore, the amount of subsidies that we can give to our farmers got severely curtailed. It's another matter that even those limits we have not exhausted in India. But if you compare to Europe and America, these were very limited. Now, what the governments and successive governments have been trying to do is to whittle down these laws so that we become so-called more competitive in the global market, and India liberalizes or opens up its agriculture produce fully. Now, what people like visionaries like Professor M.S. Swaminathan or C. Subramaniam or Mrs. Indira Gandhi and others, who were the architects of this entire scheme of things, that realized that food is not like any other commodity. If you will remember, food is very, very central to be institutionally food secure as a country, simply because it can also be weaponized. Tomorrow, if you go to war, you may have a situation, if you're not food secure or you do not have adequate stocks, that a country which is exporting that food to you may use it as a lever of pressure. And Mrs. Gandhi had faced it when, due to her lack of support to the Americans in the Vietnam War, we were literally reduced to a very food insecure situation, because the Americans refused to then, in the absence of unconditional support to the Vietnam War, they refused to supply us the PL-482 wheat that was being provided at that point in time as food aid. Now, from those days, we have come to a situation where we are a net exporter of food year on year. And it is this architecture that is being threatened. The National Food Security Act, for instance, guarantees 50% of the urban population and 75% of the rural population across the country subsidized food grains. It's rice, it's wheat, and it's also millets. Whatever states can procure millets can be provided to the through the public distribution system. One of the reasons why we have been able to cope perhaps slightly better than what the situation would have been because of the COVID pandemic is simply because you had the NREGA and you had the National Food Security Act, which allowed governments to pump in food through this mechanism. So you could, because you have the entire structure built up, and then you just pump into that structure when there is a crisis which is unprecedented like that of COVID. Now, the moment you change that, you have a problem, because the moment you change that, you do not have the means to procure, you do not have the means to store, you do not have the means to supply to urban consumers. And I think that is where really the crux of this matter comes. On the face of it, what are the changes in the Farm Bill saying? The changes in the legislation are essentially saying that we need to free control of farmers from farmers. We need to free them from state control. We need to open up the markets. We need to ensure that they get a price which is higher than what even the government can provide as minimum support price. And therefore, it is in the interest of the farmers that we break the mandi system, that we don't have any imposition or we make requisite changes made to the APMC laws to allow farmers to sell outside the mandis. But even if you look at the recent experience, immediately after the bill has been passed, in very few locations have traders and the private sector exceeded what is being paid by what has been guaranteed under the MSP. What makes us doubt the government's intentions on this, and this is something that farmers have been raising from day one. Why is it that a minimum support price cannot be created as a floor price, even if this so-called reform of opening it up and giving more players other than the adatiyas or the middlemen who would do most of that in Punjab and Haryana, for instance, because they follow arrangements of tied credit with farmers? Why is it that you cannot have the MSP, the minimum support price, declared as the base price below which nobody else can procure? If you had farmers' interests in mind, surely you would do that. But that guarantee is not being given. Second, you are removing the stock holding limits on the private sector on a range of commodities, which means that you are giving away control, number one, on your ability to contain inflation by using stocks to regulate market prices as a market control mechanism. Second, you are allowing the private sector to play one commodity against the other, create artificial shortages, and sell at enormous profits, which was entirely the purpose of the APMCs and the architecture that I have described earlier, to prevent, and central stockholding by governments to prevent hoarding, to control inflation, to act as a mediation mechanism between the market and the citizen and the consumer, and that goes now. So the question is that, and I'm sure Devender Bhai will speak a lot more to the specifics of the act and how it is impacting farmers. But it is very, very important for us, I thought, to understand the broader context in which it is coming, the historical perspective on it, and what is the likely impact. Now, for those of us who are too young to remember what was happening in the 50s and 60s, all I would say is watch any old Bollywood film. And a large number of Bollywood films, you would see that the villain in the film was always the grain trader. You know, you'd had the heroine being attempted to be molested, running around grains of wheat or whatever it was stacked, and it was always in a godown and things like that. And the villain of the piece was always the trader. Now, think again. There was a reason why in the popular imagination, because films reflect reality. Why is it that in the popular imagination, the hoarder and the grain trader were such a villain right down till the 1970s, from the 50s to the 70s? In most Bollywood, many far too many to count Bollywood films, you would have the hoarder or the grain trader as the main, the black marketeer as the main villain. And the reason simply was this, that you did have a situation where artificial scarcity was created by the private sector, where the private sector did not deliver. before the Food Corporation of India was formed in the 60s, before all these bodies came up, which are now the bedrock of Indian food security, you had a situation where the market had played havoc, where prices of commodities were uncontrolled, where you had artificial shortages, which were not because there was less food in the country, but simply because it was hoarded away. And it is this architecture that is now threatened, and it is this which is now a stepping stone to integrate India better into the global food trade, which is an extremely dangerous situation, because the entire global commodity trade is controlled by 2 to 3 multinationals. What you are doing is setting up a lab in India for the experimentation of these approaches, where you are allowing private sector to come in a big way and become the mini Cargills or the mini Monsantos or the mini the levers and so on, the companies who control effectively global trade in large number of commodities. We cannot allow that to happen, because farming is not just a contributor to the economy in terms of employment, where close to 60% or more of Indians, directly or indirectly, depend on the farm sector for their livelihood. It is also the bedrock for culturally, in terms of national security, in terms of any angle you look at it. Agriculture is the bedrock of Indian society, and we cannot allow that to be compromised. And I hope that deliberations like this lead to a situation and awareness where there is a far greater opposition on the streets than we are seeing now. Unfortunately, the only people, I mean, the most active people on the ground are farmers themselves. The kind of opposition that one would have expected from political parties is neither visible nor seen at a scale nationally that should be. One of the reasons, of course, is that every farmer is not going to get impacted. The worst impact is going to be felt by farmers in Punjab and Haryana, North Indian states, where central procurement agencies procure, where there is no decentralized procurement mechanism through the state FCIs. But remember that today it is the farmers of Punjab and Haryana. Tomorrow it will be other farmers. Day after tomorrow it will be the consumers. And I think this is not a farmer's issue. To see it limited from the lens of a farmer's issue as something that will impact only agriculture is faulty. Because if the architecture falls, if the pillar falls, each one of us as consumers who are citizens of this country, rich or poor, will be impacted. And which is why I do hope that deliberations like this lead to a greater resolve to protest this till these draconian laws, till these black laws are entirely withdrawn. So I'll end here, and we can, of course, hear Devinder Bhai and Rawatji and other distinguished panelists, and then take on questions. Thank you again for inviting me.